Do is ask you to just pronounce your name and spell it.
Okay.
And you'll be talking to Matt.
Over there. Who's covered? I can see the dog hair already.
Okay, go ahead and tell me your
Okay, Sara Jane Rose, S-A-R-A, space J-A-N-E, space Rose like the flower, R-O-S-E.
Okay.
I need to record this too, so. You ready, Jim?
I am ready.
Okay. All right. The first thing I'm going to ask you about is your neighborhood.
Yeah.
If you were traveling somewhere and somebody asked you, like, where do you come from? What's your neighborhood like? What would you say? Describe your neighborhood.
You know, it's interesting. I came from LA where people were always on the street doing stuff. So when I first got here, people tend to go into their garages and shut their garage doors, and there wasn't a lot of interaction. But over the last 10 years, when we came, we had the only kids on the block. And there were a number of homes with widows and widowers, elderly widows and widowers. They're all gone. So we now have more kids on the block, 2 or 3 families with kids. So people are out in their yards playing in the afternoon. Neighbors directly across the street are out all the time in their front yard. They don't have kids, but they're in their front yard. Neighbor next door gardens a lot. So it's a very friendly neighborhood. We came from a neighborhood that became cohesive during the riots in Los Angeles. So we thrive on a cohesive, sort of interactive neighborhood, and we've tried to nurture that here and have been pretty successful with it.
So it's a place that feels like home to
Absolutely,
you.
Absolutely.
What's it like politically? Do you talk about politics with your neighbors and stuff?
You know, I do. And it's changed. As I said, a lot of widows and widowers here before, and I think they tended to be a little conservative, and they've left, and the families that have come in, I don't necessarily walk up to someone and say, hi, you know, I'm a progressive, what are you? But it comes up in conversation, and I know specifically 2 homes on the block when we moved in were lived in by conservative people, and I now know that people in those homes are very progressive. I think this neighborhood was designed and built in the 70s, which is why we had all those elderly people here. So as they've died off, as they've gotten older, younger families have moved in because the prices were really good for a while. They're going up again. So I think as you get more families, you get a more progressive flavor to the neighborhood.
And you are supporting Secretary Clinton.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What makes you support her?
You know, it's a number of things. First of all, she's been fighting for women. She's been fighting for healthcare reform. She's been fighting for the rights of LGBTQ, racial equality since she was in my focus, which was when Bill Clinton was elected. I think given, and I'll be honest with you, 8 years ago I voted for Obama in the primaries. Now, with the experience she's had in the foreign policy, as well as her background before that, I have complete confidence that she can step into that office and hit the ground running, especially in the international scene, which is so obviously important right now in relationships with leaders abroad. I see her as someone who's able to interact and converse and not scare the person across the table with her demeanor. So those are some of the reasons. And I just really like her. I like how she talks. I trust who she is.
Yeah. What do you make of Senator Sanders and that whole phenomenon?
You know, I have a 20-year-old who's in school in Vermont who's a big Bernie Sanders fan. And when I was in college, you're probably too young to remember, it was John Anderson. And I went up to Vermont. I was in college on the East Coast and went and campaigned for John Anderson, who never made it out of the primaries. I think Bernie is a voice we need right now for young people, because young people have tuned out for a long time from politics because they see it as establishment, they see it as stale, nothing new. He has new ideas. I don't necessarily agree with them, but my philosophy is whatever brings young people to the table is good. Do I want to see him as president? Not necessarily. I'd much rather see Hillary. He has interesting ideas, but they're concentrated in a very narrow area in terms of the economy. And the bottom line is I don't find his ideas tenable. What he's suggesting in terms of the economy. In terms of healthcare reform, he wants to bring in an entirely new system. I can't even imagine, first of all, trying to bring in a new system, let alone that being accepted by the powers that sit at the Capitol right now in D.C.
As you look at the Republican side, it's a unusual field.
Oh my God!
What do you? Is there a fear with Bernie as the nominee in the fall that this opportunity to continue Obama's legacy might be squandered? Is that
In
part
that
of his electability, part of your
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm not sure I trust in the electability of any of the Republicans right now. So I really, it's hard for me to weigh the scenarios. And there are obviously polls right now that say if Bernie was running against Marco Rubio, if Hillary, I think, yes, I think there would be an electability problem. Whether it's Trump, Cruz, Rubio, I think he is, I find him abrasive, and I find him difficult to listen to because it feels like he's always arguing. That's not a tone that arrives at the table to work with the other people at the table. So I think, you know what, I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not sure I can give you a decent answer about whether he's electable or not. I would hope if he was the candidate that he would be. But things are so crazy right now on the other side. You know, who knows? I think Hillary is far more electable than Bernie. That I feel very strongly about.
The tone of the Democratic campaign has been better or more simple than the Republican side. But there is, you know, the so-called Bernie bros, this litmus test on who's a progressive or not. That I spent a lot of time on social media and observing how supporters of candidates behave. Is that put you off at all as somebody who's does that bother you at all, the tone of it on the Dem side?
You know what? I'm going to just take a break. If you want to open that door, the door on the right, for many years I filtered my news through Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, which was a really nice way to hear just the bits I wanted to hear, or the bits that would make me feel like I was being represented. The tone on the Democratic side has been acceptable to me. I don't like when people denigrate the person on the other side, in the other podium. Although when you're trying to become a candidate for president, I have a feeling that that's almost unavoidable. I think they've been so much more civilized. I mean, the Republican debates, I can't even, I turn the radio off the morning after. I can't even listen to that. But I think they've been very civil towards each other, kinder in the beginning when Bernie was saying enough with the emails, let's move on from that, which I thought was very big of Bernie. And now, it's getting down to brass tacks, and there's going to be a bit more, it will be a bit more heated. But all in all, I've not had an issue with it.
Okay. You kind of touched on this. What are your media habits? You mentioned Colbert. Where do you get your news from?
I get my news from NPR. That's a big one. That goes on at 6:15 when I come downstairs, and it stays on for at least until noon. We get the Daily Oklahoman every day, which I read through my progressive filter. We get the Wall Street Journal, which I read except for the editorial page. But last week we got a flyer that said, we get the Sunday New York Times, which we had daily in LA. They are delivering 7 days a week in Oklahoma starting now. So we are going to cancel our Wall Street Journal and get our New York Times. And she may want to be let back in. And I'll say that again for you if you want. I actually like the Wall Street Journal except for the editorial page. It's actually a fabulous newspaper, but I love the New York Times. And the other day, it was complimentary on, I think, Tuesday and Wednesday, and it was open, and I started reading an editorial that was critical of Karl Rove, and I forgot it was the New York Times. I thought I was reading the Wall Street Journal. I went, oh my God, what's happened here? But then I realized, oh no, I'm reading the New York Times. So we will get that delivered daily. So it's NPR, it's the New York Times, it's a little bit of social media, although I don't often trust social media to be as accurate as I would like it to be. My new humorous news is Samantha Bee. Her new show is fabulous. It's sort of the closest thing to Jon Stewart since Jon Stewart. And I think that's probably it in terms of news sources. I don't watch local news. Okay. I actually used to watch MSNBC a lot, but I shied away from that because it started sounding just like Fox, but on the other side. And I don't appreciate, I would like to hear people speak. I don't appreciate when they're invited on and then they're talked over the entire time. So I don't watch that anymore.
I have a question, Matt, if I can ask.
Sure.
I'm just listening to you talk here. Coming from Los Angeles to Oklahoma had to have been some degree of culture shock. And then secondly, I think Oklahoma proudly wears its badge of being the reddest state in the nation. Mm-hmm. And I was going to talk to you a little bit. What does it feel like to be this progressive kind of conservative in Oklahoma?
So this is what happened. I moved here. My friends in California were just shell-shocked when they found out I was moving here. When I lived in California, I was absolutely not involved in politics. I didn't talk about politics. I did not have a political vocabulary. I did not know a Republican person or a Republican woman in my life. I didn't. Do you want me to wait until the dogs stop drinking?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
He'll be done in a second.
You're the first person ever that's been aware of the audio.
I directed television for many years, so I've been through the sound guy going, wait, there's a refrigerator on 200 yards that way.
No, you're right.
No.
Usually no one is ever cognizant of that. Like, oh, I can hear that.
Yeah. So I came here, and within a couple years, I got on the Planned Parenthood board, and then I was at the Capitol one day. They asked us to come to the Capitol and walk around as we talked to legislators, and I said, well, I'll go, but I don't speak that language. I'm going to stand at the very back. Well, by the end of the day, I was standing at the very front. And lo and behold, I did speak that language when it was something close to my heart. In California, I never had to worry because the issues always went my way. As I started doing what I did, which was founding Sally's List about 7 years ago, progressive people started coming out of the woodwork. And I cannot tell you how many progressive people there are in this state. I still have people who come up to me and to my fellow board members and whisper in our ears, and they'll say, I'm the only one at work who's progressive. We don't talk about it. And we say, well, how do you know you're the only one if you're not talking about it? Look, if a third of the voters in Oklahoma voted for Obama, that's a lot of progressive people. That's 33% progressive people, and there may have been more who just didn't go out and vote. So I don't feel like I live in it's called a red state, but I have people from the coast saying to me when I fundraise, they'll say, oh, it's a lost cause. And my feeling is, this is not a lost cause at all. I mean, look at my district. Look at Cindy Munson. I saw that coming years ago. And when we first recruited her to run, we said to her, you are not going to win right away, especially because David Dank had one more term. He'd already been in 10 years. David Dank was not going to lose. He was a very great legislator. He was liked by people on both sides of the aisle. He deserved to finish up his term. She wasn't going to win. But it's good to get your name on the ballot and for name recognition, which in this case, because he passed away during his term, she shot right out there and already had her operation set up. But I don't feel lonely here.
Sorry.
Oh, I like that one. Voice in the wind at all.
Wait, I had paused. So
That's okay. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Good.
Say that again.
There goes my furniture. I do not feel like a lone voice in the wind in Oklahoma as a progressive. I have good, great company statewide. I've traveled around the state talking to people, and they're everywhere. And it's not a progressive as in, I hate conservatives. They're progressives whose values are taking care of people who are utterly unable to take care of themselves, keeping education funded, women's reproductive rights, keeping women out of prison, so sentencing reform. We send more women to prison, not only than any state in the United States, but any country in the Western world per capita. Oklahoma does. And that's not because women are out shooting people and committing violent crimes. They're being pulled along very often by abusive partners, boyfriends, husbands, and there are ways to change that. So the progressives I work with are people who see a brighter, as I say to people, a healthier, safer state for all of us.
Have you ever been a Republican when you were younger? Or
yes, what a great question. I wasn't 18 yet, but when I was in middle school, Nixon was running, and we had the mock election. And my father was Republican, my mother was not. She was a Democrat. And I voted for Nixon because I figured my dad couldn't be wrong. So I was a Republican for one day in 7th grade. Okay. And but when I turned 18 and I registered to vote, I registered as a Democrat. And I am actually proud to say that... Stop. This is why she's on Prozac. I am proud to say that my father, at the age of, he passed away at 91 last year, but at the age of 83 or 84, changed his party affiliation. He after the Twin Towers were bombed, he and my mom were visiting LA because I grew up in the Bay Area, and there was a march against going into Iraq. And we had a big screaming match, but he said, we have to do this, we have to do this. It's unpatriotic of you to go out and protest against invading Iraq. Well, when he found out that he had been lied to by the Bush administration about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, he flipped parties. He was so angry. My father became such a liberal. He would call me up and he'd say, you got to listen to what Obama's preacher said because it's so good. So it was just great. It gives me great hope for people who may not agree. I mean, it's okay if people don't agree with me, but it gives me hope that change is possible at a very late age.
Well, and when you encounter a neighbor that might be just diametrically opposed to you politically, what are your conversations? Do you just avoid politics, or what's a typical conversation?
We have a funny game going on with our next door neighbors. We put a sign up, they put a sign up. We put a sign up, they put a sign up. They also happen to be wonderful people who I really adore. So we will talk about other things. I don't talk about politics with them. He's my dentist, so I really don't want to offend him too much since he'll be drilling my teeth. But no, they're really kind people. I would feel in an emergency that would be the first home I would go to. We just don't talk politics. They're diametrically opposed to what we believe in, but that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. I've never had a problem with that. As long as my rights as a human being and a woman are not trampled on, I'm okay with what you believe in. I really am.
That's all I had. We good?